I am Barbara Faranik-Matonet, founder and president of the Art Circle. On behalf of the Art Circle board, I would like to welcome you all. Today, we will start with the first chapter of our new series, The Orientalism, with Orientalism and the Nage collection. As you all know, Orientalism refers to the work of the Western artists who specialized in Oriental subjects, realized from their travel in that region during the 19th century. The legendary Nage collection was assembled in the 70s and 80s and would be almost impossible to put together today. Its owner has been kept secret. The collection includes major artists like Ludwig Dutch, Jean-Léon Gérôme, or Charles Robertson, to name a few. We are very honored and privileged for this first chapter of our series Orientalism to have with us Claude Pienning. Claude is a world-recognized Orientalist expert. He's the head of the 19th century European painting and Orientalist art at Sotheby's London. As moderator today, we have the pleasure to welcome Mai Aideb. Mai is Director Middle East at Sotheby's Cairo. In addition to that, she's also involved in art education and support actively young Egyptian artists. The conversation will last around 45 minutes and it will be followed by a Q&A. Please, could you all mute your microphone, and may I ask you to address your question by writing them on the chat. At the end, May will address them to Claude. Claude and May, thank you again very much for being with us today. Now I will leave the floor to Asma, who would like to say a few words to Claude before I hand it over to May.
Thank you, Barbara. Welcome, everybody. Romantic Oriental was fascinating by the color of the experiment of all powerful and culture and nearly always opportunity to it is subject with love and with love. Ladies and gentlemen, pleasure tonight to welcome my friend Claude Pienning. I cannot thank you enough for opportunity accepting our invitation to be with us tonight. It is a great pleasure, as always, to have you. To all of you, do not miss this golden opportunity. Tonight, fascinating journey will be moderating by amazing Maya Adib. Without any further ado, may for you, Maya, and behind of the Art Circle. Thank you. Maya, you here?
Yes, I'm all here with you. Thank you so much for having us, Asma Hanem, Barbara. We're Claude and myself, and I know we share both the same sentiment. We're so excited to be here and part of the Art Circle, and we're so privileged and honored to join you guys during this time. I hope everyone's keeping safe and everyone's staying home. And I know Claude has a fascinating presentation for us all today. And I'm just going to start by sharing the screen. So bear with me. Give me 5 seconds.
And shukran to everyone for joining. Salam alaikum. Started presently.
And I think, Claude, we're ready to rock and roll.
Ready to go. Wonderful.
Yes. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Claude, who, as Barbara has kindly said, he is really been working on Orientalism for the past 15 years, or was it more than 15 years, Claude? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Over 20 at Sotheby's, I should say, but yes, specifically on the Orientalism, you're right, about 15 years, yes.
About 15 years right now, which is amazing. And Claude and I had the pleasure of being in New York, and Claude kindly invited me to be part of this Najd collection, which Sotheby's is so honored to be entrusted with. But like a small anecdote, I started at Sotheby's in 2008, and the first thing I did was work in Orientalist art, and they basically gave me the Najd book, and this was the Bible when everything to do with Orientalism. So there's no collection that is better or more sort of diverse and rich when it comes to Orientalist art than the Najd collection. And I know Claude and I both share the passion and this like gratitude that we were entrusted with this. So Claude, I
Yeah.
hand over to you.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is the most representative and arguably the most important collection of Orientalist art in private hands ever assembled. And so, as Mai says, it's a collection we've known about, of course, ever since it was put together in the 1980s by one man from the region, from the Middle East. Never did we think in our wildest dreams that we would one day be entrusted with it to sell parts of it. But that day came last June, a year ago, more or less exactly. And some of you may have followed the incredible success that was the Najd sale on the 22nd of October of last year, in which we offered 40 of the prime pictures from this collection, which in total counts about 150 works. So the collector really was busy over the period of just about exactly 10 years. And his collecting started in 1979. It ended in around 1990. So he collected for exactly 10 years. And then all of a sudden in 1990, that was it. He felt he had achieved his goal. He had put together one of the most representative collections, as I say, and he published a book about it, the book to which Mai referred, called The Najd Collection. And this really is a great reference book, which has also helped us in our cataloguing of the pictures that we're selling.
And Najd, as we all know, and I'm sure most of the audience members know, Najd is not in any way related to the collector, except that Najd is essentially the first capital of modern day Saudi Arabia. So this is sort of his, this is the name that was bestowed upon this collection by the owner of this collection. It wasn't in any way, shape, or form the name of the family or anything, but it was just what the collector had decided to give as a whole composite for this wonderful collection.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll talk more about the collection, but essentially what we're going to do today is talk about Orientalism, give you a brief introduction to what we actually mean by Orientalism. Some of you are very familiar with the genre, others maybe less so, but I wanted just to give you a little bit of historical background as to what Orientalism is, how it was received in its day and over the ensuing 200 years in the 19th century, in the 20th century, and now in the 21st century, and also to tell you a bit about how the market has evolved over that period of time, before going on to exploring some of the themes that were dear to the Orientalist painters, using pictures from the Najd collection that we have already sold or have upcoming in the sale next week to illustrate some of those themes. Asma, you touched on a very interesting point in your introduction, which is that I think you talked about the sort of the love and the sort of intrinsic, you know, the empathy that these pictures exude. And I would say that, as an opening remark, that Orientalist art very much is now a bridge between East and West, between Europe, America, and the Middle East. You know, I think it fulfills a very important role in that respect. It wasn't necessarily intended to when it was made 100 or more years ago, but that truly is what it has become, a bridge. So just to introduce quickly, if I may, what Orientalism actually means. I mean, the very word Orientalism sounds rather old-fashioned. And it is, to be honest, and arguably it's not even terribly politically correct. I think if ever there was a museum dedicated to this genre of art, it probably won't be called a museum for Orientalist art. It might be called West meets East, or East meets West, or art as a bridge. But the origins of the word Orient go back to the 19th century. Now, in the 19th century in Europe and America, the Orient was essentially the Mediterranean rim. It referred to Istanbul, the Ottoman Empire, the Levant coast, Egypt, North Africa, and even southern Spain, Andalusia, which of course was, you know, under Muslim rule for a long time. And this is what gave Orientalism its name, and it's a label that, for better or worse, has stuck. I don't think it causes offense, particularly as a descriptor for a genre in art. It's just convenient, to be honest. But essentially, Orientalism started in the 19th century as connections between Europe and North Africa became, improved through the age of steam, the steamship. Also, the railway, the Orient Express opened in 1871, so you could now travel from London to Istanbul in a space of just a couple of days, and from there you could move on around through Syria and Palestine down into Egypt and beyond. And then, of course, there were the shipping lines across from Marseille to and indeed London to Alexandria and elsewhere. So this marked a real opportunity, of course, not only for travelers, but for artist travelers who, as you can imagine, and I know there are artists among you, are always hungry for new subjects. And of course, being able to travel to North Africa and the Middle East was an incredibly exciting prospect 150 years ago. I mean, it was uncharted territory for most people. And there were artists who were really eager to explore, these new subjects that the region provided. Now, there were some artists who were, very outgoing and entrepreneurial people who literally booked passage to these countries and even spent time in the countries. Others were less adventurous. They were what I would call the armchair Orientalists. They would sit at home relying on second-hand accounts of people who had been. And to be honest, for the purposes of this conversation, I'm less interested in them. We're more interested in the artists who actually went. And in fact, all the artists whom we shall talk about, all of them without exception, and there are 44 artists represented in the Najd collection, all of them went to North Africa and the Middle East. They all traveled out of a genuine desire to get to know and understand a new culture.
And Claude, just to interrupt you, we have on the screen right now 2 examples by John Frederick Lewis and Gustav Bauernfeind, who were both key examples of artists who were living in the Middle East and who sort of became very much part and parcel to the culture in the Middle East and weren't only just visitors, but really adopted the costume, the identity, everything. And I will leave the floor to you, Claude, to touch upon these.
Yeah, I'll just touch upon that. So the slides you see here on the left is a painting by Gustav Bauernfeind in Damascus. He was a German artist. And by the way, I should say that Orientalism was a genre that crossed all boundaries in Europe. A lot of schools, a lot of movements were individual to particular countries or regions. Orientalism engulfed the imagination of artists from across Europe, from England to France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Russia, and even America. And it drew them to explore these countries. So on the left, you have this picture of a Damascus street by Gustav Bauernfeind. He was German. He traveled to Palestine and Syria 3 times in the 1880s. And it's hard to see in this illustration, but in fact, he is visible. He has painted himself in this picture, surrounded by a crowd of local people, painting the street, painting the scene. And on the right is a picture of the English Orientalist, John Frederick Lewis, who spent 10 years, in fact, the whole of the 1850s in Cairo. And as Mai said, he actually adopted local dress. He became as assimilated as he could in order to be as inconspicuous as he could, in order to paint as accurately as he could what he saw. So, there were artists who really immersed themselves in the cultures that they tried to depict. In fact, there was one artist who came a bit later, a Frenchman called Etienne Dinet, who settled in Algeria and actually converted to Islam and never returned, essentially, to France. So, so that's really what I wanted to say. So, these artists were driven by a true desire to understand another culture, As you know, and we'll come on to this shortly, you know, Orientalism has come under fire in the meantime for being, you know, biased and somehow colonializing, having a sort of a patronizing message. But that may be true of a very small handful of Orientalist pictures, but for the most part, artists were driven by a genuine desire to understand these cultures. And Orientalist art was the label given to the pictures that they made of the countries that they explored.
And I think, as Claude said, Orientalism was given sort of a bad name after the Edward Said book Orientalism was published in 1978. And it was predominantly, he used on the cover of his book this wonderful picture by Jérôme, and I think this was one of the things that were associated with Orientalism, because Said was critical of colonialism and the sort of appropriation of Western thought into the Middle East and how you could impose that. And I think that was sort of also it also was damaging, because I think a lot of the things Claude and I will later touch upon is art that was depicting the harem, or as Claude said initially, these artists that thought they were depicting the Orient, but were in fact romanticizing and creating figments of the imagination. And I think that's what ended up giving Orientalism a bad name. And Claude,
yeah. Yeah, thank you, Mai. I'll just pick up on that. So, which brings me on to this whole idea of the reception of Orientalist art and its changing fortunes, and indeed its changing market over the course of 150 or more years. Of course, when the art was being made, as I say, the artists couldn't wait to get over there and paint what they saw. And you know, when they got home, there was a huge and ready market for these paintings, because you can imagine, for the average person who was unable to travel, these pictures opened up a whole new world that, you know, they could just not imagine. And one of the great qualities of Orientalist art is this amazing sense of light, color, you know, exploring costumes, customs, landscapes, religion, which we'll come on to afterwards. And so these pictures, the artists just couldn't honestly paint the pictures fast enough. Such was the demand among Western collectors for Orientalist subjects. I mean, remember, this was contemporary art at the time. It was incredibly contemporary and incredibly avant-garde almost, because of course no one had been able to travel to these countries so far, and the subjects were entirely new and novel. As the 19th century wore on and we entered the 20th century, Orientalism, I'm afraid, sort of fell under the shadow of other movements, notably Impressionism and all the other exciting movements that came out of France at the turn of the century. And also, it was perhaps starting to look a little bit old-fashioned and, as Mai says, perhaps a little bit sort of, well, in some people's eyes, condescending. And this is what, particularly as you know, Europe's empires were breaking up. You know, the British Empire broke up, the German Empire broke up, the Dutch Empire broke up, and all of a sudden it was perhaps regarded as maybe not so politically correct to be seen to be enjoying this kind of art. And this is really what prompted Edward Said, as Mai says, to write this almost, I would call it a treatise on Orientalism. It's, he takes no prisoners, it's quite critical. I have to say it's directed more at text than at paintings. But of course he chose a work by Jean-Léon Gérôme for the cover. Mai, if you just want to go back to that slide, The Snake Charmer. And as a result, I'm afraid Orientalist painting became tarred with the same brush as the texts, which Edward Said was actually criticizing first and foremost. That said, you know, soon afterwards, I mean, as early as 1979-80, we saw another very interesting development, and that was this huge uptake in interest from collectors, both private and institutional, in the regions depicted in the paintings. So this was the time, as I mentioned, that the gentleman who put together the Najd collection started getting active. He was actually educated in America and was well-traveled, is well-traveled, he's still alive. And I think he encountered Orientalist art on his trips to the West. And he was among the very first collectors from the Middle East to appreciate the quality of Orientalist art and also to appreciate what it meant and its importance as a visual record of an era long gone by, an era which was not terribly well documented visually, because of course photography, although it existed, was still in its nascency. And of course, local artists from the region weren't really painting yet in the representational style. So in retrospect, Orientalist art can be seen as fulfilling a very important visual gap in the region's history. And I think this is one of the reasons and one of the drivers for this huge upturn in interest.
And Claude, as you mentioned, we have we're so privileged to have found some minor some small photographs showing these actual images of what the Orientalists were painting, whether it was soldiers or city scenes.
Yeah.
So this was when I speak to collectors and from the Middle East and I ask, why are you collecting, let's say, Orientalist art? And the immediate response is that because it's an image of a past that is forgotten. It's an image of a part of my history that I don't have a collective memory of. And this is sort of preservation for their collective memory of this history.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you go to the next slide, you know, even in the West, you know, Orientalism is now being reevaluated, I think, as a result of how seriously it is being taken in the Islamic world. And by the way, it's not just the Middle East, it's not just North Africa. I'm talking about the wider Islamic world. You know, we have buyers across the Islamic world, not only in North Africa and the Middle East, but in Asia and Southeast Asia. And there is a real interest in, as Mai says, rediscovering a period of history that is not well recorded. As a result of this new impetus from collectors in the region, Orientalism has also been reconsidered in the West. And in fact, in 2008, there was a major exhibition at the Tate Britain in London called Lure of the East, which took a fresh approach to looking at Orientalist art and tried to redress some of the, if I can call them, the views and prejudices that were perhaps laid out in the Said treatise. It was a very popular exhibition. But if you go to the next slide, Mai, I mean, this discovery of Orientalism among people, museums, as well as individual collectors in the Islamic world really started, as I say, ironically, just after Edward Said published that book in 1978. And our collector of the Najd collection was among the very first to collect Orientalist art in a meaningful way. And one of the great pioneers of, I have to say, or champions of Orientalist art in the region was a man called Brian McDermott, pictured here, with an African tribe in his younger years.
Such a beautiful picture.
Yeah, it's a lovely picture. He passed away in 2013, aged 83. But for many, many years, for 4 decades, he ran a gallery in London called the Mataf Gallery. Some of you may remember it. It was in Motcombe Street in Belgravia. Brian was actually a stockbroker by profession, but halfway through his career, and exactly halfway through his life, he decided to devote his entire career to promoting Orientalist art to clients in the Middle East. And this he did very brilliantly. And in fact, all the pictures, I think 154 out of the 155 pictures in the Najd collection were bought through Brian McDermott and his gallery in Belgravia. And thanks to approaches that he made to you know, the collector behind Najd, but many other collectors besides. And it was really he who started taking pictures to the region, to Dubai in the early days in the 70s, to Saudi, and to promote this amazing art to a local audience. If you just go to the next slide. And it was then in 1985, so Brian had got the ball rolling. And in 1985, Sotheby's was very lucky to be entrusted with a collection of Orientalist art from the Coral Petroleum Company in Texas, of all, of all people, who had put together, this was an oil company in Texas, who presumably had Middle Eastern clients and connections. And they had amassed during the 1960s and 70s a very impressive collection of Orientalist art. And when the company went into liquidation in the 80s, Sotheby's New York, as it happens, was entrusted with the sale of their collection of Orientalist art. And this is the cover of the catalogue. And it really was, you know, the greatest collection of Orientalist art before the Najd collection came along. And interestingly, 12 of the pictures in the Coral sale ended up in the Najd collection. So quite fun to see the shift away from pictures going into, you know, Western collections to going into collections in the region. I thought that was rather good. And so that was a landmark sale in its day, 35 years ago, just as the Najd collection is a landmark sale today.
And it did achieve a sort of a price point that was record breaking at the time. In 1985, yes. A $7 million sale was a substantial sale at the time. It was it was really, really groundbreaking. And from our conversations, the owner of Coral Petroleum basically he wanted to decorate his office with art. He thought his clients from the Middle East, when they came to Texas, that they would have an affinity with the work that they were, with the work hanging in their walls, that are sort of to make them feel more at home. And that was the reasoning behind one of his acquisitions.
Exactly, exactly. So that, as Mai says, that sale really set a benchmark for the Orientalist market. And it was a game changer because, as I said earlier, whereas previously Orientalist art had been the preserve of Western collectors, now all of a sudden these Western collectors, who by the way are still active today, maybe to a lesser extent, but still active, suddenly they had to compete with new buyers from the region. And, you know, the collector behind Najd was one of those collectors, but there are also museums that have sprung up. And, you know, as you know, the Louvre Abu Dhabi has a small group of Orientalist, important Orientalist works. And in fact, one of their prized pieces is this painting by Osman Hamdi Bey, a very interesting artist in his own right, because he was actually not Western at all. He was a Turkish artist, but I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But my point is, he was a French-trained Orientalist artist, and here the picture is now hanging in the Louvre Abu Dhabi. It was a painting actually that we offered for sale in London at Sotheby's in 2012. It didn't find a buyer at the time, but it has since found a new home at the Louvre Abu Dhabi, which is wonderful. And I'm sure you're all familiar. When you approach the museum, it is used heavily in the you know, in the posters, the billboards, and in the marketing generally for the Louvre Abu Dhabi's permanent collection. So we're really delighted that it's there. So we then move fast forward to 2019, so last October, and this is when we won the Najd collection. Obviously 155 pictures is a lot of pictures, and we were instructed by the owner to offer initially a group of 40 pictures. The Orientalist market, as I've described, is strong, but it is very finite. It is concentrated. It is quite small. And so one can't flood the market all at once with too many pictures. So we offered 40 works last October. The global total low estimate for the sale was £25 million, which I think is the biggest total for a 19th century painting sale certainly in my career, possibly ever. And the auction ended up totaling £33 million just in Orientalist art and in 40 works. So that was, again, a real landmark and benchmark moment. And there on the left, you can see the cover of the catalogue, this wonderful picture by Jean-Léon Gérôme of riders crossing the desert. And on the right side, you can see a shot of the sale room, which on the day of the auction, it was a packed room, which was very refreshing, because not all 19th century painting sales are that well attended, but it's a sign of the importance of the collection that so many people came.
I think the Najd collection, unlike any other collection we've ever seen in Orientalist art, could be parallel to the Coral Petroleum collection. It was a landmark sale. It was a landmark moment to have this sale. And I think it also allowed for many institutions to be interested in the works that we had up for sale. It wasn't only private collectors who were trying to acquire the work, but a lot of collectors across the region, from the Middle East, as well as from the Americas, and from Europe, and museum institutions were all keen to be part of this monumental sale.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. It was an incredible moment, and as I say, 12 pictures from the Coral Petroleum sale ended up in the Najd collection, and yeah, including I think the cover lot there at the Jérôme that made a new world record price for the artist of £3 million.
And we're so, Claude is now in the middle of setting up. Claude, will you be setting up
as we speak? Yes, as we speak. Just before I came on this webinar, I was hanging the galleries, albeit virtually, not in person because I can't go in, but I was sort of directing the hanging of the galleries for the part 2, Najd part 2 sale.
Which we're so excited to be having.
Which takes place as an online sale from the 8th until the 11th of June and can be viewed in the galleries by appointment starting this Friday.
I know that very little people are in London, but if you were in London, we would have loved to have you with us at Sotheby's to take a look at these pictures, to see the paintings in real life. And I'm hoping that sooner rather than later, we'll be able to have everyone back in the galleries with us sooner and joining us. And we're so excited about Najd part 2. And I know that we wanted to touch upon some of the artists that we have that were, Claude, that you were discussing as some the artists. Some of the artists that are part of the Najd collection, but are also some of the artists that you are keen to talk about because you feel that they do justice when it comes to the Orientalist art and allow us this sort of pictorial history of the Middle East.
Some of the artists and above all, some of the themes that run through Orientalist art. I mean, we started the talk telling you a bit about Orientalism, its background, but what were the themes, what were the subjects that the artists were particularly attracted to and recur in Orientalist art? And I've identified, for the purpose of this webinar, 5 themes which we'll talk about now. The first being the landscape. And I mentioned how, when the artists set foot off the boat, or, in North Africa or in Egypt, I mean, the first thing they were struck by, and, I'm struck by it every time I come to your part of the world, is this incredible light, this desert light, which is just so, so different from the light that we have in Europe. I mean, every part of the world has its unique light, but certainly that is more than true for the Middle East. The wide open skies and this intense sunlight, which, intensifies colors. And this picture by Théodore Frère is, I think, is an incredibly atmospheric example of a depiction of landscape. It's basically, a Bedouin encampment. It's a group of, Bedouins making camp for the night. The last rays of the sun are just visible in the background.
And
They're
you
settling
can
down.
see Cairo, like in the far, far background, you can see the minarets and the skyline. It's very, it's sort of one of the most beautiful things I find about Frere always. It's his backdrop cityscape, which he's always trying to depict. And Cairo plays a central role, definitely, in Frere's paintings.
Yeah. So I've given you, just so that you can all see the dimensions there and the details, and also the price, the estimate that we expect the works to fetch at auction. So if you keep going, Mai. So this is the Jérôme I alluded to, that was the cover, illustrated on the cover of the first Neige sale last October. And for me, this really epitomizes Orientalist art in all its glory. I mean, again, the light is just fantastic. You can see the sand, the dust suspended in the blue sky if you look closely. It's just, it really is genius the way Jean-Léon Gérôme has achieved this. He traveled to Egypt himself for the first time in 1856 and returned many times thereafter. And he would travel across the desert like this with his entourage. And so these are scenes the likes of which he would have witnessed himself. But what I love about this picture also is the stoicism of the riders. I think it says so much about the human condition. I mean, these guys are facing absolute adversity and extremes, but they just march on through. They're used to it, and they'll get there to their destination. This picture, by the way, sorry, the Jérôme made a new world record price for the artist. The previous record had been, at auction, had been £2 million, and this picture made 3 million. So it smashed the previous record. Okay, next one. Okay, and then this again is by Jean-Léon Gérôme. This is a picture called Egyptian Recruits Crossing the Desert. And as the title suggests, it depicts Egyptians who have been recruited, excuse me, we think into the Ottoman army. Egypt obviously was under Ottoman rule at this time. The picture was painted in 1857, by the way, and shown at the Paris Salon of that year. And leading these conscripts are these Ottoman Bashi Bazouk mercenaries or soldiers wearing their distinctive white kilts.
And the photograph on the side is just fantastic, because Claude, I think this is one of, I think this photo is just absolutely amazing when you compare it to the painting.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
You see how, as you constantly say, that we would like to see Orientalists who do not romanticize the Middle East, but who try to render a good sense of reality. And we see that in the Jérôme painting with this photograph from the Bashi Bazouk.
Yeah.
But here it's even more glorious, because you can see it full of color, full of richness, full of everything speaks much louder in the painting than it does in the photograph.
People who come to the galleries have often said to me when they stand in front of a Gérôme or, you know, or whoever it might be, gosh, these pictures are so photographic. And I say to them, well, you have a point. They are very photographic in one sense, but actually they are so much more than photographic. If you think about it, it takes, what, half a second, a tenth of a second to record a photograph. This picture probably took 4 or 5 or 6 months to paint. So the difference between a photo and a painting is that an artist can instill so many more layers of reality into his or her vision. And I think that's so true of some of these Orientalist pictures. I mean, obviously you can't see the detail from where you're sitting, but you know, you look at the faces on each and every one of these characters, every single one has been observed. In some instances, you can see the veins in their arms, the sweat on their brow. It's quite incredible, not to mention the light, this amazing desert light. And don't forget that although photography was around, as you can see here, it was all black and white photography. So, you know, the paintings also brought to the sort of photographic side a whole, you know, this sumptuous technicolor. Just to finish up on this picture, painted in 1857, one theory is that these people might be being led to help to start work on the Suez Canal, because as you know, the Suez Canal was begun in 1859, so just 2 years after this picture was made. Okay, my next one. And then just finally on the subject of landscape, because I know we're running out of time, this is a falcon hunt, and this was a subject that, of course, was also captured artists' imaginations and is, you know, still regarded as a very noble sport to this day. So you can see how a subject like this would be very popular among, you know, some of our Arab buyers nowadays.
Because the falconers are still, falconeering is still like the sport with falcons is still very much present in the Gulf region. Yeah. So it's not only something that we used to see 100 or so years ago, but it's something that's still very present and still very much part of the culture.
Mm. Okay, next slide. So then we move on to the second theme, which is the theme of religion and worship. And it's amazing how many Orientalist pictures there are of this subject, either of actual scenes of prayer, either on the rooftops of Cairo, inside mosques, or religious processions. This is another painting by Gustav Bauernfeind, whom I talked about right at the start. Bauernfeind, yes. And he, you know, he was a fascinating guy. He lived a hand-to-mouth existence. You know, unlike John Frederick Lewis, who spent 10 years living in some comfort in Cairo, Gustav Bauernfeind had to interrupt his stays in Palestine and go back to Germany because he couldn't afford, you know, he couldn't afford to stay out on the road. So he had to go back, sell some paintings, and then he could go back to paint again. And in all, he made 3 trips to Palestine in the 1880s. And this is a view of Jaffa, one of the most impressive views of Jaffa that we know by him. It's coming up in the Neige sale next week, estimate £1.5 to £2 million. We did have another view of Jaffa in Najd Part 1 last October. That was a market scene, which was estimated at £2.5 to £3.5 million and sold for over £3 million. I think £3.5 million. So it's fascinating.
And this, Claude, we thought might have been when people are on their way to Hajj or on their way back from Hajj. It's a sort of a celebration of the beginning or the culmination of someone's trip to and from Mecca. And it's such a beautiful picture, from the color to the landscape to, as well as the architecture, the mashrabiyas that we see painted so intricately. You
can see the dervishes leading this big procession. my reading is that they might be, you know, on their way to Damascus to join the bigger, you know, the bigger Hajj pilgrimage from there, because Damascus was one of the big starting points of the pilgrimage. Okay, keep going. Now, this is a painting that we also sold in the first part of the Najd, in Najd Part 1, and it's by the artist, the same artist represented in the Louvre Abu Dhabi. It's by Osman Hamdi Bey. And I'll just say a little bit more about this artist, because he is among the very few, if not the only, Orientalist painter painting in the European style who was not actually European at all. He was Turkish. He was grew up in Istanbul. He trained in France, where he met Jean-Léon Gérôme. He actually trained under a French academic painter called Gustave Boulanger. And what makes his Orientalist art so fascinating is that this is Orientalism as seen by an insider, really very familiar with his culture, as opposed to an outsider trying to understand the culture. So, and there are a little, although on the face of it, this looks like just another, you know, French Orientalist painting, there are many details in the picture that give away the fact that it could only have been painted by someone from the region, in the sense that he is able to poke just a little bit of fun or satire at his own culture. So the gentleman seated there on the left, being taught by the sheikh, is actually none other than Hamdi Bey himself. It's a self-portrait. And he's supposed to be all attentive, listening to the sheikh, but in fact, if you look closely, he's almost half asleep.
And we're
equally,
and we have the image as well we have the image of the mosque with the idea of the photography and having the reality. Do you want me to go on to the next slide, or?
Claude, you are
on mute.
Sorry,
yeah. You were on mute.
Yeah, I'm back. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, again, an archival photograph to show how accurate the depiction of the Green Mosque in this case really was. Then this is by Jean-Léon Gérôme, and it's a prayer inside a mosque in Cairo. And what the Orientalists absolutely admired and respected about Muslim worship was this direct communion or you know, between man and God. You know, there was no intermediary, and this was a huge inspiration, I think, to a lot of these artists who'd come from quite conservative, you know, Catholic backgrounds. To see prayer unfold like this was for them a real revelation. Okay, if you keep going. So the third theme is the theme of notable personalities or individual characters that artists would encounter. And the artist who is most associated with this kind of subject matter is the Austrian painter Ludwig Deutsch, who really was an absolute master, technical genius. And again, he took photography to new levels in his paintings. This is a picture. Hyperrealism. Yeah, it's hyperrealism. It really is. It's exactly it.
It's hyperrealism, and Deutsch was one of these artists that traveled to the region, traveled to Cairo extensively, ended up transporting back from Cairo a lot of objects. So these paintings, as you can see, was painted in Paris, but it wasn't the case that he sort of created these images, but they are part of, so there is a reality to it. So he would buy back a lot of things from the bazaar. For example, this wonderful Ottoman box. He would try to memorize the image of the back of what would be an entrance to a mosque or whatnot. So, and the costume. So we don't, yes, not all of these paintings by Deutsch were painted in Cairo, but a lot of them have elements that were taken back from Cairo to Paris for his studio setting.
And Mai, as you pointed out to me the other day, you know, the profession of the scribe, which is
Yes.
what this is still relevant today. I mean, in the 19th century, particularly so, because, you know, many people
We're illiterate.
who couldn't read or write would turn to these individuals to have their wills drawn up or contracts drawn up. But Mai was telling me that you still find these individuals in some parts of rural Egypt.
Absolutely, absolutely. You still have the bashkatib who would be there to write and to keep track of things, because there's still a high level of, especially in North Africa, of illiteracy.
Should we keep going? So one of Deutsch's favorite subjects was the palace guard, or the harem guard, call it what you will, of these Nubian, these very proud Nubian men standing guard outside palaces, mosques, harems. You know, it's left up to the imagination a little bit. But as Mai says, it's all about the observation of the detail. I mean, all the props, the costumes, the architectural detail are all minutely observed, either from his own experience, having seen these buildings, these costumes on his travels, or copying props that he brought back to Paris with him.
A lot of these props, actually, Claude, until now, we see them come up in our Islamic sale, for example. And
yes.
You can see and I'll say it in Arabic, sorry, the mabkhara, which you put, that was used, the incense burner that you can see right in front of the palace guard. This is an example of an item that we usually see come up in our Islamic sale. And these are items that you would have found travelers, as well as the artists who brought them back from Europe, from the Middle East, because they were readily available.
This leads, I just say, if we just go back to the other slide, you know, exactly who or what this guard is guarding is left up to the viewer a little bit, up to the imagination of the viewer. But I like to think maybe that, you know, there were certain places that were forbidden to Western visitors. It was as simple as that. Obviously, one of them being the harem, which we'll come on to in a moment. So it's almost like it's almost as though he is suggesting that behind that dark curtain in the background could be that forbidden harem, which, you know, he himself would never be able to enter. This is a picture by Jean-Léon Gérôme. Again, it's a picture of a bashi bazouk of the kind you saw in that other picture we looked at together, of a bashi bazouk standing in a Cairo street with his whippets, his dogs. And again, to May's point, you know, the accuracy is remarkable if you compare the execution to, you know, photographs of the time. Street life is also a very popular subject in Orientalism. This is again a view by Gustav Bauernfeind, again of Jaffa, the picture I referred to earlier, not religious at all in connotation. This is just a wonderfully evocative scene of market day in Jaffa, and it made a new world record for the artist in Najd Part 1. If you keep going.
This one is, personally, Claude knows, is one of my favorites, and it's the carpet sellers in Cairo.
Yes. And we know exactly which souk it is, don't we?
Yes, absolutely.
And yes, it's
sorry, back to that.
The carpet sellers. That was a wonderful image, and it, believe it or not, it's a huge picture, but it was in watercolor, and that's what made it even more impressive. You know, most Orientalist pictures are painted in oil, which is a very forgiving medium, but to paint a watercolor on this scale in such an unforgiving medium is an absolute feat.
And to have it in such the condition.
And in such pristine condition, and it, of course, needless to say, it fetched a new world record for Charles Robertson. It made over £500,000.
And we had a long discussion about this. I remember Barbara, myself, you, and Esma before we before we came onto this talk, which was the drink by Deutsch, a refreshing drink. And you mentioned it was a sahlab seller.
Yes. Yes, I think I'm right in saying that it is a sahlab seller, right? Which is this
Yes.
milk-based drink, which is being
Yes.
dispensed by this street vendor. He's got a few customers there. So this is a little anecdotal scene which Deutsch would no doubt have encountered on his peregrinations through Cairo's streets.
And to anyone who still visits Cairo, I think this is something that we can probably still see today.
Yeah.
And this is our last
It's our last
theme.
slide, penultimate slide.
Yes.
I just want to touch quickly on the subject of the harem. The harem, of course, was a tantalizing subject for artists because they could never actually go into it, and certainly not male artists. And it's what, I'm afraid, gave Orientalist art a bad name at times, is when male Orientalist painters sitting comfortably at home in their studios in Europe would start imagining what the harem might look like inside. And it was basically a pretext to paint slightly titillating images for a male audience. And I really don't condone them at all. But that's how it was. And I'm sure Edward Said, well, I would concur with Edward Said that such pictures really are not appropriate. But I wanted to show you this image because it is by a woman artist called Henrietta Brown. She was French, and she accompanied her husband on a diplomatic mission to Constantinople in the 19th century. And she was one of the very few Western artist painters to gain access to the harem. And as you can see, it's an incredibly respectful rendition of what the harem might actually have looked like as a social space for the sultan's wives, the children. You know, it's actually a real eye-opener. And not surprisingly, when this came up for sale in my Orientalist sale a month ago, it fetched a really enormous price. It was estimated at £50,000 to £70,000 because, you know, no picture by the artist had ever made any more than that. But I think on account of the subject matter, two bidders bid competitively, and the picture ended up selling for over £700,000.
Honestly, I think this is as close to what we will get to what the harem looked like in Istanbul. And as much as I personally love also Jérôme's bather, the paintings of the nudes, those bathing in the harem and the Turkish baths, this is probably as close to what we will get to the harem and the life in the harem. And it was honestly, it must have been a very great privilege for Henrietta Brown to visit these harems. And I'm sure the price is definitely a result of this real pictorial rendition of something that might have been true. And
that's it. And then
that's it for us. And I'm going to start asking you questions, Claude, because I can see there's so many questions up there. And the first question is, was the book 1001 Nights the artist influencing the artist's work at the time? And did the story of this book impact the artists and their concept, or did this happen following the translation of the book?
Excellent question. The answer is yes, the Arabian Nights did influence the Orientalists, but more especially what I referred to earlier as the armchair Orientalists. So the Orientalists who did not travel and who were reliant upon other source material for their pictures than actually first-hand experience. So the answer is yes, but the pictures in the Najd collection and the pictures that we generally sell at Sotheby's tend not to be, because we prefer to focus on pictures by artists who really gained their own understanding of the region.
And then what other major museums house Orientalist art?
Outside of the Middle East, there are several. I mean, interestingly, the American museums have very good holdings of Orientalist art because there is a tradition for buying Orientalist art there going back to the 19th century. Our very own Wallace collection in London has rather a good group of works by Horace Vernet and others.
The French museums as well, Claude.
French museums, of course, the Musée d'Orsay and the Louvre, of course. I mean, there's a whole string of international museums that have great holdings of Orientalist art. And not
honestly,
surprisingly, because, as I said earlier,
York,
yeah,
in
and
New
then
York,
the Met.
there was the Met had, and the Jérôme was actually on view from the Neige collection at the Met. And if I'm
Yes, thank you for reminding me. So seven pictures from the Neige collection, most of them by Jérôme, were on view in the 19th century galleries at the Met for a period of 10 years, from 2016, from 2007 to 2016, so almost 10 years. And I remember many times going there and, doffing my cap to them, never thinking that one day we would actually handle them. But in answer to your question, there are other museum. There's the Dahesh. There's the Dahesh Museum, which is a private museum in New York, run by a lady, from a Lebanese lady, and that currently doesn't have a space, but it does have a very fine collection, and I hope it will be put on view in due course. And there are other museums in the Middle East, including in Doha, for example.
And then the other question is there a market for contemporary Orientalists and the new art based on the style of the Orientalist, or is it seen as old-fashioned?
Well, that was going to be my exact question to you, May.
Well, it's it's a bit of a tricky question because there was a complete you see a lot of the Middle Eastern artists departing and ending up rejecting the Orientalist art and sort of trying to appropriate what they felt would be art that is reflective of them. And and new mediums developed, and especially in contemporary art, we see photography, we see not only art in the form of photography, but video art. And when it comes to, actually, there's one artist that crosses my mind when it comes to the subject of Orientalism, and her name is, and she's an Egyptian photographer, her name is Nermine Hammam, and she sort of juxtaposed images of Orientalist paintings with modern day photographs and sort of created a melange to strike up a discussion. So there has been the use of Orientalism in art, and we see it also in the works of Lala Essayidi, who's a Moroccan photographer, where she takes photographs of women that are completely covered and writes poetry. So there are sort of elements of it, but the exact hyper-realist paintings of Deutsch or of Ernst or Jérôme, we don't see those anymore by contemporary Middle Eastern artists.
One thing I would add is that, over the years, as I've shown Orientalist art to all sorts of people in our galleries, I have been approached by contemporary artists who have been just absolutely bowled over by the technical virtuosity, the quality of these paintings. And to be honest, putting the Orientalist subject matter to one side for a minute, just purely in terms of quality and technical ability, I mean, I would defy anyone to paint the way, for example, Deutsch paints. I mean, it is quite incredible. And, we have a number of collectors also from the region for whom it's not just about the subject matter. It's not. It's about the sheer quality, the color, the draftsmanship. That's what really, I think, is another whole aspect to Orientalism, which you don't find in many other genres.
Not at all. And then I have another question, which is, what is the percentage of Orientalist paintings that was produced by locals as opposed to those painted by Westerners, and why? And why was the surge in the 19th century and not before in terms of them painting?
Well, to be honest, 99% of Orientalist paintings of the type we've been talking about this last hour are by, well, 99.5% are by Western painters. I mean, the one exception is Osman Hamdi Bey, but it is, at the end of the day, a Western genre of art, even though it does appeal to a Middle Eastern and Islamic audience. The fact remains it is Western art. And why did it not start sooner? Well, for the reasons I outlined at the start. You know, much of North Africa and the Middle East was simply inaccessible to Westerners, let alone Western artists. And as I also said, local artists were practicing, you know, Islamic art forms, not Western painting. So, you know, the emphasis in Islamic art at the time was very much on object-based art, calligraphy, geometric art.
Absolutely, because
as opposed to representational painting.
Because the first sort of artistic movements we have that are Middle Eastern artistic movements are we can tag back to Egypt, which is the first art school in the same sense of an art school in Europe, which was founded in 1907. So prior to that, it was more about being a craftsman, because there was like this departure from painting. And one of the examples that we see is one of the prime examples that we see is for a fact in Egypt is this first generation of artists that emerged in the early 1920s after sort of them being able to go to. Of them were heavily influenced by the artistic movements in France and Italy, and there was a heavy influence from the French school and the Italian school. And then, Claude, I have one final question, and I don't know the answer to this one. Are the dogs in the Jérôme painting Salukis?
I'm sure whoever sent that question is right. I am not a dog canine expert.
So
I'm sure you're 100% right.
So I don't know, and
they're wind dogs. That's all I know.
I just want to take this opportunity to thank you, Claude, for this super informative discussion. I hope everyone that was part of our talk at the Art Circle enjoyed it. Our emails, I'm happy to share them here in the end with everyone. If everyone wants to, I shared them on the, I don't know if everyone made a note of them, but I've shared them at the end of the and I'm now presently sharing Claude's email as well.
We've looked at a selection of works from the Naj sales past and future, but if you want to see the full catalogue of the 34 pictures that we are offering for sale next week, please go to the website and have a look. The catalogue is there to be viewed.
And Claude and I always are here and available if you have any questions, if you have any inquiries. We love having these talks, both of us. We love talking about art. We're very, very passionate about it. So email us, talk to us. We're always available. Forget that, like, yes, we do sell at Sotheby's, but we always love engaging in talks about art.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Claude and May, for this fantastic insight into Orientalism and the Naj collection. We learned a lot today, and for sure we will never look at Orientalism the same way. A heartfelt thank you. We're very happy to announce that we have just launched our Instagram account at theartcircle.ae. We hope that you will help us keeping this account active. Also, do not hesitate to share our website, theartcircle.ae, where you will find the replays of our at-home series, but also general information about the Art Circle and all the events we organize. Our next event will be on the 28th of June, the second chapter of our series Photography. On behalf of the Art Circle board, I would like to thank you all for coming tonight. I wish you all a very pleasant evening. Stay safe and see you soon.